Hey, what's happening? Welcome to the Pleasure Points podcast. I'm your host, James Rohr. Thanks so much for being here. Today's episode is one of the best conversations that I've had on this podcast. I really enjoyed speaking to Devin Fredericksen. He grew up in Maui, so he's a man of many skills and traits. We talk about all sorts of amazing things. He's a part of a group called the Sacred Sons, so deeply involved in men's work and tapping into your divinity and owning your power and your shit. Our conversation went a lot of different directions, so really enjoyed having him here. You can follow him on Instagram at Devin Fredericksen. Same thing for his website, devinfredericksen.com. So I hope you guys enjoy it. I know the world is starting to open up and things are still a little crazy, but I hope everybody that you're happy and healthy and feeling good and grounded. And I'm so appreciative of all of you for being here and for listening and for your support. Thank you for the ratings on iTunes. I love hearing from you guys. You can follow me on Instagram at James E. Rohr and hit me up there, or you can email the show directly at pleasurepointspodcast@gmail.com. So without further ado, thank you, and let's start the show. All right, dude, we're live. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah.
So we were, just before we started recording, we were shooting the shit about, what are they called? Farmers markets.
Farmers markets. Yeah.
Yeah. And how they're being infiltrated by the big bad mega farms.
Not the best produce. The whole point of the farmers market is to have fresh local produce and not still importing things from around the world.
Yeah, but you were saying in Maui that you've seen imposters.
Yeah, I've definitely seen individuals who are buying stuff that are not from the island, importing food and selling it at the market. And so it just continuously highlights the points of the system that we get to shift, that we get to address and help shift, so that way we can bring that freshness of all aspects of life to people.
And you were saying that one of the things that you noticed is it's for people who know food like you do, it's really apparent what's in season and what's out of season when it comes to locally. And that reminded me of when I was in acupuncture school. I had this teacher who was Chinese, and she was talking about when she first came to the US and how she called her mom, and her mom was like, "How's it going in America?" And she was like, "It's crazy here." She goes, "I can get whatever I want whenever I want it at the grocery store." And she was struck that there was no sense of seasonality.
Yeah.
And I remember that comment because I definitely didn't grow up with any sense of I didn't grow anything growing up. And so if you had asked me to make a list of when are these things in season, I would have no idea. I'm better now, but I still would probably fail the test.
Yeah. I think a lot of us have that because growing up in a culture where that is the case, where everything's just available, and now with phones and the instant gratification, things just being right at our fingertips, people have adapted to that and expected that that's how things just are. Mm-hmm. We're supposed to have things 24/7, 365 whenever we want it. And almost it's become this illusion of a right, that it's my right to have access to everything at every single moment. And that just puts a lot of strain on the global systems and just pumping the agricultural system everywhere. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, do you think there's an impact on the body as far as not eating according to seasons?
I believe that there is, because so seasonally we're going to have different nutrients or minerals being circulated in the environment and moved because of the temperature and the different aspects that are affecting the earth and nutrient cycling. In the summertime, there's nutrient upwelling in the central Pacific towards Mexico, if I remember correctly. Mm-hmm. Or I know there's a certain point where upwelling happens, and so nutrients are coming up. So if we're just talking about fish farming, if we're farming fish versus harvesting fish and fishing when fish come through and their migrational patterns, they're going to be eating just what food's available then. Mm-hmm. And so if we're looking at the seasons with Earth, fall, winter, summer, spring, there's going to be rainfall patterns. There's going to be different aspects of the climate that are going to affect the food. And when we eat what's in season, the fruit, berries, they become available springtime, early summer. That's a good time for detoxing. Berries have a lot more antioxidants. They're not as sweet, so they're helping our bodies to detox and flush a little bit more versus sweeter fruits that are coming towards the end of the season. They're getting our bodies ready to store that energy for wintertime. And so the circadian rhythm is connected to all of that with our own bodies and that biological clock. And so how that affects us, I don't know the exact science behind it, but my intuition says if we're not eating seasonally as much to our ability, how do we, let's take that part out. But if we're not eating seasonally, I definitely feel there's an impact that is happening. And I would love to learn more and see what actually is like going on behind that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's just sort of like maybe it's just kind of old fashioned of me, but when I think about, health and dis-ease and imbalance, like I just think that like eating, and I don't do this, right? I mean, but fortunately I'm feeling pretty good, but I was thinking about this a lot and pursuing some of it when I used to be really sick. I used to have Crohn's disease. I was really sick. Which is why part of why my relationship with food is so kind of like dicey. But I do think that there's something about eating locally, eating seasonally. And it's like, I think about also with airplanes. Like, I just don't think that there's something very unnatural about airplanes and that kind of travel. Like, we haven't evolved yet to be used to that sort of shift in time zone, that change in like even seasons. If you're flying, north and south and going to different hemispheres, like, I just don't think that we've adapted to it. Now, I don't think that's creating like, all sorts of sort of like mega disease. But when it comes to sort of like disharmonies in the body, I think that has something to do with it. And I had a podcast a few weeks ago that I did where I was joking that like the answer to everything is to just grow a garden. Like, if we just tend to the plants and like nurture the earth and like nurture something that isn't us, right? And our own bullshit, like that's going to teach us a lot of things. And I think that's the same thing goes with like, even eating that, right? And so you educate people on sustainable agriculture, right?
Yeah. So when we eat locally, the local DNA, the DNA of the land, of the soil, of the water, all those aspects are woven into that food. And so it connects us to that place. It connects us to our local ecosystem, to our biome. And this is something that's being highlighted and really being studied more, is the microbiome, the makeup of all the bacteria, the funguses, and the viruses that literally support our life, that make up us, because we're more bacteria than we are human. We're about 90% bacteria and virus and 10% human. And so that aspect, whether we're growing our own food or eating locally and food that's grown around us, all those factors are influencing that, and then we put that in our body. And to me, it gives that sense of belonging, like our biological place is more connected to us. And that's been a huge part of my mission and just passion, because learning about sustainable agriculture, learning about regenerative agriculture and all these aspects, that was about 12 years ago it started, when I was in college, and learning about all these issues that are afflicting the world. And why are we sitting in a classroom to talk about them? Why can't we just take our classroom outside of the classroom and go help? And the professors, they were challenged because they wanted to do that, but they're also like, we have to follow these guidelines. I'm like, well, why are we following guidelines that aren't actually addressing problems? And so it was really hard for me to continue. But when I found out about permaculture and regenerative agriculture, that gave me something to give my heart's focus and my mind's focus to really develop in my life and gain these skills, because ultimately it's just listening. I think that agriculture comes from a place, it's been done for a while along the lines of totalitarian agriculture, where humans are like, this is the only thing that can be grown in here, this is the only way it can be done. And permaculture and regenerative agriculture, all these different like modern terms or lingo, are just ways of describing our indigenous connection as humans to the earth, and how do we, whether we harvest the food or hunt it or grow it ourselves, what's our relationship? And that to me is at the root of it all, is the relationship. Yeah.
Did you ever read the book, The Story of Bee?
Yeah.
Remember this book? It's been like 25 years since I read it. But it's brilliant, right? I loved it. It's like, and if I remember right, what he talks about there is basically that, I think it was The Story of Bee, where it's basically like, once once humans had a good handle on agriculture, right? It's like everything shifted. The whole like, the Christianity and this whole idea of like, man's hierarchy instead of like us all being brothers and sisters and, like the earth is my brother and the stones are the grandfather. It's like, no, these are all just, my kind of, they work for me, and then how, what that did when it came to mindset. And then certainly we can trace it through like archaeologically, the social strata and, increasing complexity. Once there's a surplus, then you can have people that aren't involved at all in the food supply chain and they're able to specialize or, to do other things. You can build armies and all this stuff.
Yeah.
So for sure, like, our relationship to food there's just so much that like comes from that.
Yeah. And like that aspect, kind of going back to what we were talking about with just things being available all the time, that relationship isn't from a place of gratitude from what I've experienced. When I go and be with more indigenous people who are removed from the modern systems that don't have everything available to a T, like just grab it whenever they want, their relationship's way different. There's this like inner happiness inside because I don't know if it's the uncertainty of life or the mystery that they're just with and they're with it all the time and they're okay with it and they love that and they celebrate it.
Yeah.
But that has been so transformational for me to experience that, to see these people who are so happy but have way less. And I'm like, wow, okay. Like that just, it's changed so much for me along the way. And it's helped me to really appreciate in spaces where I can have access to whatever I want. If I want to go have a 3-course high cuisine vegan meal that's like really intricate and takes all this time, because I understand what it takes to make a really high-end meal like that, to do that, like I've celebrated and I enjoy it. And it's not something that I take for granted because I don't want to do it all the time to just have it be expectant. And yeah, it's crazy because it's such a gift, this life. And at the same time, I feel like mainstream culture expects it to like work for us. Kind of like what you're talking about with that totalitarian perspective of we're the ones, it's us. It's only us. Everything's below us. We're the highest form of intelligence. And I'm like, well, what about mycelium that's spreading information across the forest and talking and things that we still aren't even able to fully quantify scientifically because our instruments aren't that advanced.
Right.
What about that? Like, what about the wisdom in the human body that heals, that, I mean, your work with Chinese medicine and acupuncture, like we're not necessarily doing the healing, right? Like you put in a needle point where it needs to go in the body, but the body then does that. It's not like we're the ones doing the heal. We're just kind of like the intermediaries. We get to be, we can be the middleman or we can participate and not be the middleman that's trying to take a cut in a sense. So
yeah. I joke that I'm like the gas station. Well, fuck, people don't do that anymore, but I can't realize how sad. Like I was just like hit with a 2x4. Like how old I am now. I used to say that it was like, I'm like the gas station attendant. Like when I was a kid, like if you didn't know where the fuck you were going, you had to pull over to the gas station and be like, hey, where's this street? And you'd be like, well, you can go this way and it'll take you an extra 10 minutes, or you can go this way and it's faster. Yeah. That's kind of how I feel the acupuncture is, just sort of removing some of the spiritual components. Just like, I'm just giving the body directions. Like, hey, like a little more of this here, a little less of this here. And, you'll probably start feeling better, but I'm not doing anything. I mean, it's just, I'm giving a suggestion to the body perhaps, but that's it.
Yeah. And that comes from listening, right? You've learned to listen. Sure. You've learned to be with the body a lot, whether it's with agriculture, acupuncture, business, like all of those come from a place of listening. And the more we listen, if people listen in business, they can make a lot of money. If people listen in acupuncture, they can really help out the bodies. If we listen in agriculture, we can grow really delicious food. So I think that concept of listening is really crucial. And this whole Corona time has highlighted how important it is for us to listen and all the things that are being brought up across the board, whether it's racism, whether it's injustice, police brutality, all these aspects. Like even the food system has been highlighted during Corona. No matter where, places have been shut down. Farmers markets have gotten shut down. People are like, where do I get food? Like, wow, all the supplies in the store are not necessarily available. What now? Like, how do we move through this? And like coming back to relationships, like where is that in people? Because to me, I've seen it disappear a lot. Stopping and asking for help or asking for direction. Like people are like, you can't look at your phone. Like the expectation that's shifted away from just human contact, human connection and relationship. Yeah, it's definitely scary without being scared of it. It's scary to see what's going on with the isolation and the separation of humans and dehumanizing humans by having us wear masks. And there's so much communication happens on our face without any words.
Yeah.
Like right now, sitting across from you, I see you smile.
Right.
Like that gives me a better feeling than if I were to see you like change your face and like have a frown or like look mad. But like I know that from lots of interactions with lots of humans listening through my eyes.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's a whole nother part that I keep on coming inside myself. I'm like, we have to remember to gather. As humans during this time, no matter what's going on, we got to remember to gather. All the numbers that people are talking about with the increases of cases, and I'm curious what your take on this is. Like the cases are increasing, one, because we're having more testing, two, people may or may not be listening to the guidelines that are suggested, and the mortality rates are not high. Right. They're not increasing as the numbers are going up. It's not like more people are dying.
Yeah.
Just there's more numbers that they get to add.
Right.
And so what's your take on the herd immunity? And do we hide from a virus? Do we let it in and not be afraid of it and boost our immune systems?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm definitely out of my sort of my zone of genius, if you will, or my area of expertise, but it's been interesting to observe, right? Because you flatten the curve, right? When everyone was sheltering in, and like those of us that understand some of these things, like we knew that precisely that by doing that, it was just kicking the can down the road.
Yeah.
Like it was kicking the can to this moment. Right. So like no one should be surprised that there's a spike here. And like, this was exactly what was going to happen. And, you know, the way I look at it is like, the chances are you're going to get it. Like, in fact, that would be the best thing. Right, is for all of us, or, you know, 80, 85, 90% of us to get it, especially the kids, right? I've heard of a handful of cases of kids who have had some weird reaction, but it hasn't even necessarily been shown that it was directly related to coronavirus. And kids are the backbone to our cultural immunity. Like kids interact, they pass the germs back and forth, they start building the antibodies. Like we need our kids to be interacting. I think personally that shutting down the schools was the worst decision that they could have made. But I understand, like we didn't know what we're dealing with, and it was scary and overwhelming. You know, taking all the sort of the conspiracy theory stuff out of it for a moment, like it was scary, right? And it was novel, like we didn't know, right? But now it's like we shouldn't be surprised that the numbers are increasing. And I also don't think that we should be freaking out. And like for me, looking at the media and all this stuff, it's like, you know, we're definitely being manipulated, right? No matter what source you're listening to, like we're being manipulated. So like I try to be aware of the manipulation, like what is happening here. And, you know, there is kernels of truth in all of these things. But it's like what I was remarking this morning that I think is interesting is like now we just hear about the number of cases. Like in the beginning, it was the number of deaths. It was the number of hospitalizations. It was the number of deaths. Now what we're hearing is all of these new cases, 100,000 cases, 5,000 cases. Miami has 10,000 cases, like whatever, like new daily record in cases. And my initial thought is, who gives a shit?
Yeah.
How many people are dying? Oh, not that many people are dying, and it's like still mostly people with other conditions and all this stuff, and like not just like the loss of any life is tragic, and I don't even like the tragic. It's sad. It's an experience, right? Yep. So I'm not saying that we should like treat it lightly, and at the same time, like let's look at what's actually happening. So you're telling me that there's 100,000 cases, but there's only like 0.5% or less that are dying supposedly from it, and there's still usually some huge comorbidity that goes along with it, then like isn't that kind of exactly what we want? Isn't that best case scenario?
Yeah.
That like everyone's getting the thing, we're getting the immunity, and like a very, very, very small percentage of people are actually dying. So, you know, that's I haven't talked about it on the podcast, you know, but that's how, you know, that's how I'm looking at it now. And I'm completely open to being disproven and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
But like my feeling from the very beginning with this thing is like, if you are at high risk, then stay inside, take care of yourself. Right. And if you weren't at high risk, like I think personally, the impact on the economy, and more importantly, the impact on humanity, on like us being able to gather and to be with each other and to support each other, the profound impact of loneliness on the body that is very challenging to be measured, right? That the impact on all of that stuff is massive. It's massive. And if we had taken all of the resources that we put into like stimulus packages and all this bullshit and put it towards providing like top-notch service for those that are at the highest risk, get them, safe places to gather, get them food delivery, get them all of that, put money into people that need to work from home to allow them to work from home. Like I personally think that would have been much better use than shutting everything down the way that we did. And hindsight's going to be 2020. And we,
Literally.
But again, like we didn't know, we didn't know.
It's literally going to be 2020.
Yeah, exactly.
What's interesting, there are a couple of things for me. One, I'm pretty sure I got COVID or coronavirus in Miami at the beginning of this year.
Uh-huh.
I was talking to a friend who got it in China in October last year. And all the symptoms identical to everything they're talking about.
Yeah.
I had all the symptoms. I was hallucinating. I was almost passing out from the pain. And I don't really get sick. I don't know the last time before that I had gotten sick. And it was fascinating. And as time's gone on and I've looked at the symptoms, I'm like, wow, I wonder if I got it. And it didn't make me any more scared. I was just happy. I'm like, cool, I got it, went through it, I'm good.
Yeah.
And when you talk about the children, like and I talked about it earlier, our microbiome, like when we are around each other, like that's how we exchange. There's so much information that's being exchanged that we don't see through the microbiome, the bacteria that's all around our body that's talking and interacting. And I think that we pass so much that way. And so like you're talking about that isolation and the loneliness, there was a study that came out in Germany that more people died from isolation than COVID. More people died because their symptoms worsened, because no one was able to care for them, because they weren't able to talk with people or address things.
Yeah.
More people died from being isolated than anyone died from COVID. And so that just really struck me because I firmly believe that, but that was some sort of scientific marker to say, hey, what are we actually doing?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah, when I'm pretty caffeinated today, so I'm a little fired up around it all. But like,
fire it.
Like the thing that struck me in this whole thing was just like, I can't even say it nicely, but it's like if you believe that the government actually has your best interest at heart, like it's time to wake the fuck up. Because like we're shutting everything down for this virus, right? But what's happening with the obesity?
Yep.
Let's look specifically at the food supply and the food supply chain, right? I saw this great meme this morning that was like, it was something like, so many people are dying from COVID, this many more people die from obesity, and like Doritos just came out with a new flavor.
Yeah.
And we've got like all of these, food subsidies, perhaps with corn and high fructose corn syrup. Like there's no regulations on that shit. And it like, unfortunately, this is where it's a little bit slippery when it comes to the social dynamic, is that like it's way cheaper for somebody to eat a bag of Doritos or to get a Happy Meal than it is to buy some broccoli.
Yeah,
like when I take my kid, like I take my kid to McDonald's, like I'm not, I'm fucking, McDonald's is delicious, right? But like for $3 for a Happy Meal, he gets chicken nuggets, he gets apple juice, he gets French fries, he gets apple slices, he gets a fucking toy for $3.
$3.
And like, I bought some organic peppers at the grocery store the other day, and it was $5 for 2 peppers.
2.
And it's like, if you're hard up, like what choice are you going to make? If you got a family of 4 or 5 kids to feed, like it's a no-brainer.
It's beyond obvious.
Yeah.
That's why we're in the situation that we're in, because of, you said, the subsidies and the giveaways and the connection of all of the big monocrop agribusinesses, all these people that are literally working together to make it happen. I don't understand how it actually exists. I don't understand how I can buy a hamburger for $1.
Yeah.
Like I don't.
I said the same thing to Jen. And when I took Y for the first time, I was like, how do the finances on this work?
Still, like inflation, economics. I'm like, wait, I could buy a $1 double cheeseburger back in high school, and I can still buy a double cheeseburger for $1 now.
Yeah.
everything else has raised in prices.
Yeah.
But how does that stay the same? Like, I know some of it because the companies literally grow their crops, and the U.S. government will buy them, and they'll just put them in silos and store them.
Yeah.
And let stuff literally rot and not be eaten to maintain the price. So that way they can do what they're doing. And to me, it's so simple because there have been so many memes that have been generated in this time. If we just took the smallest fraction of whatever budget, whether it's the military or the entire U.S. budget, how it would solve all these issues. And how, like you said, that the government doesn't have the best interests. And there's a part of me that still doesn't even want to say that, doesn't even want to believe that.
Right.
But I've seen it so many times. And I know that there are people who are in government positions who have have humans' best interest.
Totally.
But those people don't necessarily have the choice. Those aren't the ones who are making or have the power to say yes or no to this.
Yeah. And
that's the part that just is really challenging, because I'm like, do I get involved? Do I go into politics?
Right.
Do I go and join the police force? Do I help address police brutality? And then there's all this information of people who get fired for speaking up to it.
Right.
So it's almost like there's this inbred quality or trait in our system that says you screw things over, you lie, you make things best for you, and you're going to win. Versus if you speak the truth, like they say, speak the truth to police officers, but then you get a ticket. And if you don't speak the truth, you can go to court and get your ticket dismissed. Why do we have a system where lying is supported?
Yeah.
You're like, don't tell the truth. I'm like, okay, like I'm okay with working the system, but ultimately, are we going to ask the question why?
Yeah.
Whether it's food, whether it's government, whether it's human dynamics, like who's making these decisions? Why? Like it's a really crazy place to explore.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think my wake up comment would have been a little harsh, but it's about, for me, it's always just about trying to pay attention. Like who's getting the money and who's getting the power. And if we follow those breadcrumbs, it's going to give us a little bit more perspective, right? And I agree that you said it really nicely. Like there are, for the most part, everybody, like the people that I know that are in government, like are great people.
Yep.
But I think it's like turning a barge, and we can only sort of control so much of, like, we only have so much influence.
Yeah.
And, some of these things, like, that probably came from good intentions, and then all of a sudden you realize it's like, oh wait, this is like super messed up. But then once that momentum has started, but just this whole idea that like the government is like looking out for us all the way, it's like, no. And like the BLM movement certainly shows that like we're not all being looked out for in a good way. And so just trying to like stay alert, and then it still just comes back to like, okay, like we go macro, and then I just come right back in and be like, okay, what do I have some sort of like dominion over, right? It's like, okay, I'm gonna grow my plant. I'm gonna tend to my little garden here, or like I'm gonna try to I'm gonna be as mindful as I can with where I spend my money. So if I am shopping at Costco, I'm gonna buy the organic things because I want Costco to continue to support the organic farmers.
Did you know that they are now the largest distributor of organic like food and products in the nation?
Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's really cool. Like,
I think it's awesome. Is it awesome? I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, we can go into crazy things right now because it's like, okay, the organic certification has become watered down. It's not as good anymore. You can like have up to 70%. And so like the lines are getting blurred. So like that's a whole nother thing that I think what you were saying, like taking it from the macro to the micro, for me, at the end of the day, it comes back to relationships. Like, okay, cool. If they shut everything down right now, how many people know their neighbors?
Yeah.
How many people are confident? All right, cool. Even if everything went crazy, we all are good. Like we're relatable. We have connections with each other, and we will be there. Like I know a lot of places don't have that. I know I don't have that because I just made a move to a new home, and like that actually is a little unsettling for me, which is why when Corona happened, or when Corona like really started to spike, I was like, okay, like I need to go reintroduce myself to all my neighbors because I wasn't at my typical home. I'm originally from Maui. I went to Maui to put on 2 retreats, but I was at my mom's home. And so we rented out my mom's property in her home for the retreats. But then we got stuck there, and that's where we were quarantined with Sacred Sons. And I just wanted to go and meet all the neighbors. Thankfully, I knew four of the neighbors, because I had already been farming on the property on my mom's, one of her pieces of the property, and met the neighbors at that point, invited them over, was talking to everyone, because that's been my focus. Tying it back to the story of B, this is another aspect that I'm really passionate about, is community building and placemaking. Places where humans can gather, where they can safely gather. Streets used to be for humans. Streets where humans would travel. Now streets are dangerous. Now streets are meant only for cars. And if humans go out on them, like, cars just honk and rage at humans. But looking at the history of how we've gotten there, the Assyrians, going back like in the history of humans, the Assyrians were the ones who created the grid system, the street system. So that way they could come into a village that was round, with round structures, corners, places where you could not see what's around there, not as predictable. So they implemented the grid system so that way you could stand at an intersection and see in four directions. Be like, it's coming this way, that way, that way. And that was more like a military tactic. And that's carried itself to where we are now, to have the grid system with the electrical grid, the road grid, and the house grid system. And a mentor of mine, Mark Lakeman, for anyone who's listening, check out Mark Lakeman. He's up in Portland, an amazing man who's gone around the world to indigenous villages and tribes and looked at how to build community. How do we do that? And looking at places, going to Europe, going to places in Mexico and South America and Africa and all around the world, and looking at historical representations of community. And there'd be like a central gathering plaza where everyone can come together. And so coming back and like talking about community, like it's such a beautiful thing to reintroduce, because no matter what happens, we're happier humans when we're in community, when we're in connection. What is it? Blue zones? Have you heard about that? There was a report. I don't know who developed it, but there are these blue zones, and they've studied humans around the world, and they're finding out why are these the most healthiest communities. They're active, they're eating fresh more so than not, and they're closely connected. There's that close-knit connection. And I mean, what's fascinating about that to me is a child will die if it doesn't have physical touch when it's little. Right. So like that to me in and of itself is the solution. Like if a child what causes a child to die? A child will die if it doesn't have food or milk from the mom and touch. So we literally need air, clothes on our body to keep us warm. We need some type of nourishment, and we need connection. Like those necessities, no matter where we are, what's going on in the world, whether the economy is thriving, we still can celebrate that and share in that. So like that's just what I'm passionate about and want to keep on supporting and bring together.
I was working with a coach, and she said, we were talking about that thing, and she goes, we know the babies die if they're not touched. She goes, at what age do we think that stops applying to us?
Yeah.
Like we need it. It's important. It's sacred. It's huge. Yeah.
It's really sacred.
And man, it's like, that's a big one. And the community gathering is, for me, it was that was part of the problem when I was sick with Crohn's. So I had like colitis. So I was going to the bathroom all the time, and like, I was just afraid of food, and I was really this was like, I was like 20 to almost 30 that I was dealing with it. So I hated going out, and I'd get really upset because like, the social thing is to go to dinner. Dinner was like fraught with anxiety for me because like I was afraid of what I was going to eat. What was it being cooked with? Was there going to be a bathroom? Like if you're in the big cities, like New York, Chicago, like oftentimes, the men's room might have like 2 urinals, but oftentimes only one stall. And if like someone's like having a moment, like I may not have made it in time, And so it was like, so I'd always just come up with excuses to like meet up after dinner. But it like at a huge cost of just connecting and enjoying, And so now that I'm feeling better, it's like the bringing back like an appreciation for food and just being able to sit and enjoy a meal with somebody without being so worried is like, it's huge. It's massive, But I'm curious about the work that this community gathering work that you're doing, because we were talking a while ago about your work with the Sacred Sons. And when I was growing up, I was working with the Mankind Project. And, I just have a profound appreciation for men's work. And you're like, I look at you and you're on like the forefront of this sort of this new wave of men's work. So let's hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it's been really nourishing. And I was talking to one of my friends. His name's Marco. He's a part of Sacred Sons too. And I just realized being out here in Miami, I realized how much I've missed the gatherings and the coming together of the celebration of brotherhood and the challenging and the uplifting and all these aspects that we experience, because since October of 2018, we've been gathering and doing a lot of work. And then that's what I had planned. March, 2 retreats in Maui, a retreat in Sedona at the beginning of April, 2 retreats at the end of April in the Pacific Northwest. Then I was going to go to New Zealand and do multiple retreats, then come back to San Diego at the beginning of June for a retreat, and then go to Portugal for a retreat, and then go to Scotland for 2 retreats. And then all of July, I was going to travel around Europe and then come back to August to another retreat.
Wow.
And all of that was kind of focused around men's work and bringing together men. Mm-hmm. And what it's done for me is it's really highlighted how important our biological based structures are. And what I mean by biological based structures are like men, we do really well in like responding to like, hey, we need this. All right, cool, let's go do it. Mm-hmm. And I feel like women do a really good job at like directing that and like knowing how to nurture and care and call that in. And I'm not saying that men can and women can't do both, but like underneath it, we have our biological based structures. And it's like, if we go ask a woman to a man, like across the board, to go lift up something really heavy, the man most likely is going to have an easier time.
Sure.
And if the woman, well, just childbirth alone, like we can't do that. So that's a very like specific biological based distinction. And when we gather in our biology, like there's something magical that happens. Like sitting with you is way different than like doing a podcast with a woman.
Sure.
Like there's just different. There's energies. There's different things interacting. And like when I get to wrestle, when I get to like really push myself to that edge and meet my edge but remain in connection and to not disconnect, and to see other men do that, and to see men stepping into vulnerability while meeting their strength and doing both, and recognizing that I still am a man if I cry, if I express, if I talk about what's going on, if I have a challenge, dear God, like, don't show anything, right? Like to be breaking down and dismantling the distorted structures of like how the masculine is supposed to be is really a part of what I'm passionate and want to be involved with, because the more men we have online that are activated, that are listening again, right? Paying attention, what we've been talking about, and aware of our relationships and aware of the impact that I'm having on another, I think that that's going to help us shift. And if there's a lot of men who are in positions of power to make decisions, if we have more of those men connected to themselves and not cutting off their empathy, cutting off their compassion, cutting off their ability to feel, I feel that we're going to shift and be able to address more things rather than trying to like change the barge all at once. Because if the person who's driving the barge starts to turn the wheel, the barge is going to turn.
Right.
But if we're trying to talk, like we need everyone on board.
Right.
We're not only focusing on the person turning the boat, but that's a really powerful place to focus, because there's a lot that can be done there. And also, if we have everyone else on board, on boat, who's on the boat on board with this shift, with this change, then we're all supporting it. And then we're all like, yo, Captain, what's up? And so what Sacred Sons has been doing has been phenomenal. And we just launched on Monday, 2 days ago, our youth program, the youth mentoring program.
Very cool.
And with Mankind Project, I got involved with Boys to Men, doing the young boys mentoring program. And and so it's been really sweet, because a lot of the guys in Sacred Sons have been involved with Mankind Project and other men's movements, and Robert Bly and different people like that, Robert Moore, Michael Mead.
Sure. I had a whole episode on Iron John.
Yeah, I love it. Such a good one.
Yeah, amazing.
Iron sharpen iron, right?
Yeah.
And so
go get the key from under your mother's pillow. I love that line.
It's time for us. It's time for us to grow up and not look like we get to be the ones who step into that and embrace that responsibility of not expecting women to be our moms.
Right.
Like that's a huge part of this work. It's a huge part. And I can speak to that from such deep experience because my mom and my dad separated when I was 3. And like for the longest time, seeking validation, trying to give for a form of validation, trying to like show up and do all these things so I just get validated rather than I'm choosing to be here. Like I'm showing up with my heart. I'm not trying to get anything from you. I'm just here to celebrate me and celebrate you, whether that's a man or a woman.
Right.
And so to be with guys who have been involved in many different aspects of the men's work movement, just the men's movement of men coming back to ourselves, to see what's being birthed, because I got involved with Mankind Project as well, and there was something that just wasn't quite feeling it for me. And and I've heard that from a lot of other individuals. Not to say that Mankind Project's not bad or as bad as it's amazing. We need all types out there, and it felt like there was something that was needing to be shifted or needing to be changed or like updated.
Cool.
And so we're doing our best to listen. We're doing our best to meet the times and address what's going on. That's why the youth program's coming out, because we're like, all right, it's really time. Like the name Sacred Sons in and of itself lends itself to working with youth because sons, but we started out with men. And as time's gone on, we've had so many parents reach out to us, say, when are you going to start working with the youth? Like we have our children, like we have our 5-year-old son, and we're like, we're waiting down the line. But if we can start with fathers, if we can start with younger men, if we can start with all these components, we're doing our best to build an organism, a structure to receive. And so we've started with men. We are calling in elders. We know that we need the elders. While we still have the elders and the connection to the elders and the ancestors, we want to call them in now. There's a big cultural disconnect between youth, adults, and elders. And so by calling in the youth, hopefully that we're going to start calling in the elders as well. And the men who are myself and the other men who are bringing through the youth program right now, we're like kind of questioning, but also trusting. And we're like, okay, we're not elders. Like we're doing our best to mentor these young boys, but we also, we need our elders. Like where do we go with our questions? And we want to be, and it's not like they're not out there. They're definitely out there, but it's just, there's such that disconnect. And so I think ultimately, like, to me, the men's work movement is part of a larger aspect of just the human work. Like we do the men's work to show up to do the work in the world. Like I do my inner work so that way I can actually show up to life. Because if I'm not at ease inside of myself, how am I going to go out into the world? Like you talking about, like with Crohn's, that journey with Crohn's, you want to go gather with people, but you're dealing with something and you've done that work. You've literally like embraced that and not turned away from it, not numbed it, hide from it. And
there's plenty of time for that too.
Well, I mean, that's part of the process, right? I speak from so much experience of like my own numbing and turning away and hiding and discrediting of my own self and doubting. But the more that I really embrace it, the more that I find that ease inside myself to just be myself and I'm still every day I'm meeting conditioning and colonization of my mind and my heart and my body, and doing my best to release that so I can show up, so I can embrace the mystery of not knowing what it even means to be a man. To know that we're discovering that, and to know that like a new man is being called forward, a new woman's being called forward for like the archetypal aspect as well as the individual, the macro and the micro. And I know I'm saying a lot about this men's work movement because to me it's a lot. It's so potent, and for like the part that I'm passionate about is the community building. Like I want to do gatherings where men go off with the men and women go off with the women, and then we come back together. Because I see so much men doing their stuff and women doing their stuff, and it feels like on a larger level, the collective is still waiting till we meet each other in that space where men and women can come and meet each other, whatever background, orientation, whoever they are. Because to me, that's the representation of the external. Like once I can go and meet that, then I get to start seeing that in the outside world. So,
it's beautiful. It's beautiful. It reminds me of I did the San Pedro cactus once, and we brewed it up, and it was amazing. And we went out to the desert, and this was when I was really sick, we went out to the desert in San Diego, and at one point I was like, there's like these beautiful, like kind of like sometimes streams and waterfalls,
were
sort
you?
of like I want to say it was Anza Borrego, but I don't remember.
It feels like Anza Borrego.
Yeah, and I was like, I was enjoying this moment, and I saw this, like I heard this voice, and it said, you do a great job of pulling energy up from the earth, right? And I saw all this like beautiful, like Mother Earth energy kind of fill me, right, to like right below the belly button. Mm-hmm. And they said, and you do a great job of connecting to Father Sky and allowing this masculine energy to come down. And that came down, I'm filled with blue, kind of like to the solar plexus.
Yeah.
And the whole middle section, right, was empty. Right? And then they said, and you do a terrible job of allowing those two to mix, like the yin yang symbol, right? And it was so beautiful. And it was just like, waterworks, of course. And then like, just, it started to open, and I started to play with that energy and allowing the mixing of, this sort of true masculine and true feminine, and that it's in the interchange and the exchange and the interaction, that's where the chi comes from. And people that have listened to this podcast have heard me talk about it, but it's one of the things that I love the most about Chinese medicine theory is that like, this idea of chi, part of like one of the theories of like, or explanations of where it comes from, is the interaction of yin and yang, and that it's the movement of the one and the transformation of one into the other and back and forth, that the byproduct of that is energy. Just like when you rub your hands together, the byproduct of that friction is heat, right? As the yin turns into the yang and vice versa, you get this creation of chi. And that's where being like so stuck and so rigid and like, not embracing your full neuroplasticity, it's like, that's where the stagnation arises. And what I appreciated about the Mankind Project, I mean, shit, this was like 24 years ago now.
I love it.
Was like, it jolts people, right? It's like, it's really jarring. And it's like, it's a profound calling back to home, back to like discovering kind of who you are. But when I look at it from a Chinese medicine perspective, it's like it moves the chi, right? So it's breaking some of these patterns, and it's allowing for there to be more interaction. And so I think what you're doing to consciously bring like men and women, have their things and then come together, it's like, it's that, it's like, in order to get this, like the full expression of, or interchange of yang into yin, you have to have that. And just to bring it back to what we talked about earlier, like, the thing with the face masks is in Chinese medicine, all of the yang meridians go to the face. So yang energy is like the expansive, the explosive, typically masculine. It's expressive, it's dynamic, right? That's why the face like gives us so much information.
Yeah.
And so when you're wearing a mask on an energetic level, we're blocking this transmission of yang chi.
Wow.
And so like there's this kind of preponderance of yin, which can be heavy, it can be lethargic, it can be, it's not as immediate in an interaction with somebody as far as like a quick exchange. And I can't tell you how many times, because I've been traveling and stuff, so I choose to wear a mask there, and I just respect people, whatever. And so how many times I smile behind the mask, and then I'm like, oh, they didn't, like,
I can't see.
There was no there was no exchange there. It was like there was eye contact, but like, unless you're really getting, like, Jen's got an amazing eye smile, but like I don't think mine always does that. And it was a stranger, you're not going to like show that kind of explosion, but just even a simple smile is gone. So there's this muffling of yang energy that's happening, right? Which is interesting. And when you look at my experience with men's work and just sort of being a man and all this, I remember when I was at the Mankind Project, I must have been 17 at the time. I heard this guy, I think about it all the time. I forget, we were going around and I don't remember what exactly the context was. I remember people talking about things that they were sort of ashamed of, or things that hit them. And he was at this black guy. He was like, he must have been in his 50s. He was just awesome, just like really cool vibes. But he talked about seeing a sign, or somebody referred to him as a gentleman. And he was like, I am not a gentleman. Like he's like, I can choose to be gentle, but like, I'm a man. and I am a warrior, and like, don't refer to me as a gentleman. It was, I'm not saying it quite right, but there was something in how he delivered it, you know, which was like, that I think is really needed right now, is to like own that divine masculine, own the power, own your ability to destroy. It's like one of my favorite quotes I saw recently was, oh fuck, how does it go? It was something about like the difference between like being able to do violence and choosing not to versus just being kind of like weak. You know, like not being able to make an impact is not the same as like choosing to be gentle.
That's reminding me of the quote, I'd rather be a warrior in the garden than a gardener at war.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Like that's...
Exactly. But like this, like we have to, like I think we need, like I love the work that you and Kevin are doing with the Sacred Sons from what I've just sort of seen on social media and getting to know you. And my own experience with other men's things is like, you know, we have to own that full yang chi. We have to own that full ability and the capability to destroy.
Yeah.
And like all of the violence that we see out there, like we are all capable of it. Even these people that are virtue signaling left and right, like you are also capable of being an asshole and of being a violent and of being a murderer and of being aggressive and of being awful. And like the sooner that I have owned that in my own life, and I saw it certainly like in my first marriage, like, you know, like the power and the ability to destroy is like, you have to own that. Otherwise it's going to end up owning you, you know? And this idea of pretending that that's not there, like pretending to be gentle, right? This is kind of what this guy was getting at. Like it blew my mind because I was raised like, be a good boy, be a good boy. You be a good boy. You're rewarded for being a good boy. And so it's like, okay, what can I do to like get that praise? What can I do to get along? What can I do to like not make waves for my parents? You know, it's like, oh, well, if I be a good boy, I get praise and I don't create those waves. And so a lot of it has been kind of like unlearning some of that shit. But it's, you know, that comes with its own side effects.
Definitely side effects. I've been going through that so much, seeing the parts of myself that are still conditioned and meeting that. This whole time with the COVID quarantine has really highlighted that for me. And I remember thinking about this years ago when I really started to see this movement of men becoming like hyper feminine.
Yeah.
And becoming really soft and stepping away from that power because of rightfully highlighted aspects that are going on in society. And so I understand it. And also it really has me concerned because the less engaged and interactive men are, the more easily controlled people are. Yep. Like if we're not willing to own that power, that ability to destroy, to stand up for what is sacred and protect what's sacred, then we're just going to get literally washed over.
Yeah.
And I'm not advocating for anything. I'm just saying we need to know when we need to step in. We need to know when things need to be handled differently. And you're talking about owning that full power. Like to me, that's a large part of the work that I do in my own practice with men and women is like owning the power of our sexuality, our sexual energy. And to me, it's not from this place of like trying to have mind-blowing sex or to experience more pleasure. It's about owning the power that is in that energy to create a business, to create a child, to create a meal, to create a home, to create an art piece, a podcast. Like it's all creativity. It's all creative energy. And if we're suppressing that and hiding that, especially as men, because I know men have so much shame around sexuality, like that's an aspect of our expression that isn't being expressed, that's being repressed, and then that lashes out. And that's not, in a sense, like conscious use of that power. We're not wielding it. We're lashing out. We're just hurting others because we're hurting from not expressing. And I think that's a big piece of what's needed right now is we need men to step back in and own that power and to recognize that like our communities need us more than ever.
Yeah.
And I don't know what that looks like across the board, but I know that if we came together and at these different protests with what's going on, if we came together and like organized and like came together as men, like there's a lot happening there. Like that would be different than just outrageous bursts of uncontrolled anger, not knowing like where or what to do with it. And so I think that's a large part of this men's work too, again, is like, how can I sit with that destruction? How can I sit with that power and not have to wield it? Something that I've also reflected on during this time, quarantine time, is the phrase "a bull in a china shop," as if it's a bad phrase. But what about a bull who's able to walk through a china shop? Because while we were at my mom's house, like I was talking about in Maui during the quarantine, I watched these bulls across us in the pasture almost every day. And I watched them be very graceful. And there were times where they like jumped and were trying to mount each other and dominate each other and like get rowdy or whatever it was. But for the most part, they were very graceful. And so breaking the stigmas that men need to suppress their anger. Because like, again, be a good boy. Don't get mad. Like, if you're angry, like, let's calm that down. Stop, calm, not breathe through it, not move. Like, what is there? It's speaking to you. It's teaching you something. It's probably highlighting a boundary that's being crossed or something you're not okay with. And like all these aspects, I think, are being, hopefully, I'm doing my best, Sacred Sons, other men out there doing the work, Mankind Project. Like, I know there's organizations doing their best to address this. And I want to make sure that we keep on addressing it because so much is at stake. And I think it's not like this impending apocalyptic doom, but all of our choices affect so much down the line that we don't even see. And so kind of back into agriculture, planting trees that I won't ever reap a harvest from, but they're going to be there for the future. And this awareness of how do we do that? How do we do that in men's work? How do we do that in the economy? How do we do that in our communities, in business, in so many other aspects across the board? How do we bring that awareness back in? Because I don't know if people are getting this idea, but like there's times where I feel like I come across as I'm saying that a lot of society or whatever is going on is bad. I don't think that's the case. I feel like pretty much everyone out there has a genuine heart. We're humans. Like, I think that maybe there's been like a lot of walls and layers that have been built up. But across the board, like we're talking about, I've came across so many people in governmental roles and positions when I just approach them as a human. Things are way different. Like I was at the park at Peacock Park yesterday with a friend who I met here in January, and he and I were working out, and the guy came and said the park's gonna be closed at 7 and telling us that we can't be there because he thought that we were like doing a client and coaching practice. But we were just working out together and we talked to him. But then 5 minutes later, there's this other dude who's just yelling at the top of his lungs at this guy because all the guy's doing is his job. And to just approach him like a human rather than like, fuck you, I don't want to hear your bullshit because I'm pissed that I'm not able to express as much because I want to be at the park because all this stuff is going on and I'm also feeling the collective energy. Like that guy came back and his head was down. And when he left with us, he was happy, he was smiling. I could hear him talking to other people. But when that guy happened, like he just was crushed. And so I feel like I'm not saying that things are bad. I'm just saying that how can we how can we readjust our addressing of the aspects that are going on or the issues and that we're facing so we can find that humanity? Because I think that's the thing that keeps on coming through for me is I just pray that we don't lose our humanity through all of this.
Totally. Yeah, likewise. I was been saying to Jenna, I'm so tired of social media. Just a bunch of fucking people telling other people how they should be living. You know, and it's like, I know I can do that too, which is why I had a reaction to it, right? But it's like, you know, I don't know. Did you ever read the book The Road by Cormac McCarthy?
No.
I think if I have a copy here, I'll give it to you.
Please.
It's fucking amazing. It's like a post-apocalyptic thing. It's one of my favorite books ever. But it basically follows a father and his son as they're navigating this world. And the thing that he keeps saying to the son is like, carry the fire. Like you carry the fire. And as you're talking, you know, it's like I keep getting that image, right? And it's like we carry the fire and we're talking about men, we're talking about yang energy, Chinese medicine. Like Chinese medicine talks about that fire, the Dantian, the Ming Men, this gate of vitality, right? And it's like that is the thing to be nurtured. That's why Chinese medicine doesn't like people. It doesn't recommend cold foods. It doesn't recommend cold water, right? Because like all of that stuff can dampen and put out the fire. And it's like, if we have one responsibility in this life, it's to nurture the fire, nurture your own fire and like nurture the fire of humanity, right? And it's that fire and people gather, right? It's like all the time, like my fondest memories of all of that men's work that I've done and then going on to work with the Lakota and sweat lodges and Sundances and all the things is like gathering around the fire. There's always a fire, always a fire. Even when we're doing a Chinoopa ceremony, like we put a candle there because it's the fire. It's the council fire. It's the fire for the elders. It's the gathering fire, and like that's the thing. It's like when we talk about like what is the work to be done, like this kid and the little kid in the road, he's like, Dad, what am I supposed to do? And his dad's like, carry the fire, like carry the fire. Like that's what we need to stoke that yang qi and to carry the fire, and you're doing it right. And like I'm curious about your coaching program, right? Aside from not just to the Sacred Sons, but specifically addressing shame, because the shame is the damp rag on the fire. It's like it takes what could be this warming, nurturing fire, and it creates all of this smoke that can asphyxiate like your life force.
Yeah. Well, I feel really inspired to share something right now because it's so aligned with what you said, like carry the fire, and then I'll go into the shame. My grandfather was in a coma. He was about to die, and I knew that he was about to die, and hadn't said anything for days. And that morning I wake up, I'm in California, he's back on Maui, and I go into a meditation. And when I'm in the meditation, he comes to me. He literally like takes up my whole internal vision, and I see his face, and he just says, Devin. I'm like, wow, okay, you're with me, Grandpa. Like, hi. And he just says, keep the fire going. And it wasn't so significant at that moment. Like it was very significant because I'm like, wow, my grandfather came to me in my meditation. Like he's never done this before. And then later that day, again, he was in a coma, but later that day, my mom was with him at the hospital, and he grabs my mom's arm and he says, Devin, Devin. And my mom's with him, and she says, what? And he tells her, he said, tell Devin to keep the fire going. So he wakes up from his coma, grabs my mom's arm and says my name. Of all of his grandchildren, of all of his siblings, he says my name, and he tells her to keep the fire going. And that's just reminding me right now of that. My grandfather was a community builder. He brought big brothers, big sisters to Hawaii.
Wow.
Being there with the timing of the youth mentoring program right now. So when you said that, I'm just like choking up inside. I'm like, whoa, like I'm about to like just explode with like just feeling his reminder. Yeah. Crying, feeling his reminder of like carry that flame, cultivate that. And so bringing that aspect of sovereign and shameless, the name of that program, like I've been working on developing an online program for years, and I've moved forward with it, haven't moved forward with it because obviously there's been lessons for me to learn and grow in it and to really embody it. And I feel like right now where I'm at is I'm at this place where I feel really confident and grounded in it. And it's not from like a really high peaked energy. It's like come from this like cultivating and carrying that flame. And the aspect of so sovereign is addressing the aspect that as men, we have our seed, our sperm, that literally we can choose to release or not. The aspect of semen retention and being able to release that or not, and just how that applies to our life. Do I want to give this creation energy to a project? Do I want to say yes to something that this person's asking me for? And not just related to sex, but it's related to everything. And then the shameless part is, I know so many men who want to step in to this deeper level of confidence, deeper level of connection to their sexuality, their energy, be able to show up in the bedroom, meet the parts of Western society that say it's performance-based, but changing the relationship with our sexuality from one of performance-based to one of like curiosity, to get to know our bodies. Like, what does it mean for me as Devin to cultivate my fire, my yang energy, my sexual energy, my life force? What does it take to cultivate that? Because for another man, it might be different. It could be different for you and different for me. And there's practices, yes. And at the end of the day, I need to know what works in my body. And it's that connection and breaking the shame that so many young boys get at a young age of, oh, you're exploring yourself, don't do that. Don't touch yourself, stop. And so at a young age, we're just stopped and turned away from our own body. And I'm not like, I don't come from this place from a hypersexualized spot. When I first was thinking about doing the program, it was something about like turning men into sex gods.
Sure.
And like, I get that because the marketing aspect, but that's that's just not ultimately like my goal with it, because my goal and my like belief and firm connection to it is that when men heal their relationship to their sexual energy, we'll heal our relationship to the earth and the feminine. Yeah. And so I do this work because of my love for the earth, because of my love for women, because I have a mom and a sister and cousins and aunts and grandmothers and all my other friends that are women. Like, I want that world to exist for them. Mm-hmm. And I want a world for men to be free in our bodies. So that way, if we do have sexual energy moving us, whatever that is, whether I'm eating food and I get to enjoy the pleasure of embodiment of being a human, I can express that, or I can express it when I'm making love, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's kind of the journey of where I am. I got the idea to really launch this course in 2016 when I went on a vision quest. Mm-hmm. And a friend was like, dude, you should create a course. Like, no one really talks about it. And it just, with my own journey, you talking about your journey with Crohn's, right? Like my journey with doubt and self-sabotage and saying yes and then not following through on it has gotten me to a point to really go through these lessons to even learn more, so that way I can bring more breadth of experience and compassion to the space of working with men, because it's a really dark, challenging place for a lot of men. Sure. Because a lot of men feel completely lackluster and dead and unsuccessful because of their thought of how they're performing. Mm-hmm. And again, it's in the mind. So a lot of the work is just getting us out of our mind and back into our body to experience what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so huge. I had there's like, because there's again, back to Chinese medicine, there's a clear sort of cultural tie to withholding.
Yep.
You know, and they have like some of these ancient texts, they have specific prescriptions for how often like men should be ejaculating, right? And so I remember when I first started experimenting with it, where I was gonna not ejaculate, and I don't think I can overstate it, but it was a profound shift in my life. Mm-hmm. Because what it did was it showed me how much of my focus in life is on the end product or the end result. It was just always on the end. Like, I wanted her to have an orgasm. I wanted my orgasm to be great. Like it was always there. And when I decided, like, no, I'm going to do this experiment, I'd done some reading, like the Tao of Sex, I think was the book, right? And there's a couple. I had a whole, there's an episode of this podcast early on where I had a whole thing on it.
Nice.
And, but what I discovered was like, oh my God, like, I have not been present for any of the foreplay or any of it. Like, I was only present with, like, is my dick hard, and is she getting off, and am I going to get off? Yep. Like, that's it. Like, that was like the thing, right? And it's like, and then like you feel like a little bit of loss of an erection, and it's like, oh my God, what's happening? No, come on.
Something's wrong. Yeah, come on. Where'd you go?
Think about something good. And so, but like it revolutionized, like, certainly my experience in the bedroom and in my like me as a partner. But also, like, it carried over in all these other areas of my life. Whereas, like, no. I'm going to just enjoy the taste of the raspberry. I'm going to just enjoy, like, the new sprout in the plant or whatever, rather than, like, waiting, like, how come it's not growing faster, right? It's just like, no, this is all part of the process.
Yeah.
And when we look at the physiology of, like, just a typical heterosexual relationship, and like what typically a woman needs to be aroused, it's like 45 minutes of foreplay is like just sort of getting things started for a lot of women. And so if guys are unsuccessful or like not feeling accomplished in bed, it's like, well, did you give yourself the warm-up time? It's like, think about all these other places in life where you, like, if you're going to, like, I'll just stick with the fucking trope, but like if you're going to barbecue, right? It's like, you're probably going to marinate it for a while.
Yeah.
Right? That marinade might be 12 hours. If you're smoking meat, that might be 24 hours. It's like women can be approached with a similar kind of reverence for the amount of time and appreciating, like, all of the things that go into that.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until I started practicing some of the withholding and really just exploring some of the other energies that, like, I started to kind of get it. And it was only in that practice that I started to see how much of my mind was sort of like end focused.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. And I think that's so much of what we've been talking about throughout this entire conversation of, like, we have to get it to stop. Like the end result of what's going to happen with this virus.
Right.
The end result of, oh, I just want my food. I don't care about like what it takes. I just want it all the time. Like, and then sex, like I'm just going to make sure that like this is what's going to happen at the end. Like we're forcing. Like that's the expectation. That's me getting out of the moment and not being present and experiencing everything that's happening along the way.
Right.
And that creates so much distress because I'm not just experiencing what's going on. I'm not connected to myself. I'm not connected to whoever I'm connecting with. And that takes the fun out of it, in my opinion.
Yeah. So as we wrap up here, a question I've been meaning to ask you for a while as we've been going on is like, how would a man in particular know that it's time for them to do the work? Like, is there like something that you've seen in like the men that are drawn to Sacred Sons or your coaching work or your retreats that like, is there a kind of a commonality? Do they feel like they're, sort of like hitting dead ends? Do they, I'm not sure.
I think it differs. A lot of them, I think a lot of them definitely hit a rock bottom and they don't know where to turn. And so a lot of times, honestly, women have been a big supporter of the work. Right. Women have sent a lot of men our way, whether it's my personal practice or Sacred Sons.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of women are fed up of how they're being treated and they're recognizing their worth. They're just re-embracing their worth that's always been there because it hasn't been gone. And so I think that's one part of it. Men are unsatisfied in their relationships. Men are not happy with sex. Men are not happy in their jobs. Men are like, the list goes on. But again, I think it's that end focus. They're not in the process of like, what's actually going on for me. And they know somewhere inside that it can be done differently. Yeah. Even if they're not really aware of it, the body has the wisdom that's like, there's more to me than like what's going on. You're not like embracing all of it. And I think that is the piece, is that there's just this voice that's in all of us, that's in them, that's saying, it's time to change. And I think that they recognize that if they don't change, if they don't shift, their life is really going to change. They don't know when or how much, but they know that there's a lot at stake. And this life is so precious. Like there's so much at stake. Because I could get back in the car and drive back over to Danny and something could happen to me.
Right.
And like my life could be done.
Yeah.
I could get on a plane to fly back to Maui and my life could be done. Like I might have talked to my dad yesterday and I might not talk to him today. So like there's so much uncertainty in life that the more that we embrace that uncertainty, it becomes joyful.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And I would imagine too, that there's a certain amount of like men realizing that they're playing roles, right? I see with some friends of mine where they're like, I'm like business owner when I'm at the office, and then I'm like husband with her, and then I'm like father over here, and then my dad's still alive, so I'm like son there, and it's like, we become so attached to the roles that we're supposed to play that like when they do get a few minutes to, jerk off or like watch sports or like just sit and whatever, there's like this kind of like, but who am I? Like what do I want? And like for me anyway, like I've wanted all of those things, right? And there's also, I think, something that's like what I've appreciated about all the mentoring that I've had is like the becoming aware of the masks. I don't know that we can ever really get rid of all of them, but we can become aware of as my Lakota teachers talk about, the robes that we put on, like what are the robes that we wear? I think that's really helpful. So I would imagine that, people that are just feeling, especially men that are just feeling kind of frustrated, where they're like, I know that there's something more. They know that there's more. They know that something is missing, and for me, I always experienced it before ceremonies and stuff as like it starts as a whisper. The good times I hear it as a whisper and I do something about it.
Yeah, those are the good ones. Those are the real good ones. Hopefully we can all do our best to make that more part of our experience.
Yeah, amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on. How can people find you and get in touch with you and learn more about all the work that you do?
Yeah, thanks for the conversation. It's been really sweet. You can find me on Instagram, Devin Fredericksen. My name, got my website, devinfredericksen.com. Those are the easiest ways to get a hold of me, and I'm here. So please reach out if you have any questions or any desire to connect.
Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. Thanks for coming on. Carry the light, everybody. Tend to the fire.
Yes,
and,
please.
We'll see you next time.
Aloha.